Okay, if everybody would mute now, we will begin our March meeting. So last year, I do recall real quickly that we had our free speech meeting in North Omaha at the Malcolm X Center in February, and we had ambitious goals, Rick and I and Joe, to meet with other communities, minority communities in the city. And so we had set up our meeting with the Latino community in South Omaha, and we were working on the indigenous community as well. Well, and our Latino meeting was set up for April. Well, obviously, everything went off the rails in March. So February was our last in-person meeting. We're probably headed towards some sort of in-person stuff maybe this summer, later this summer. But for right now, thank you for joining us on Zoom. And today, our topic is going to be about the viability and the visibility of moderation of moderate positions in politics in America. And the old thing is, if a tree falls in the forest, applies, that's for sure. And the other one is just really quick. I will just give you a personal anecdote. In 1908, I founded the Coffee Party in Omaha, not the Tea Party, the Coffee Party. And it was like a little piece of this. It was civil discord, civil debate, civil discussion. And I got a call from the Lincoln Journal that said, "Hey, Mike, I understand you're the organizer of the Tea Party, the Coffee Party. The Tea Party Express is going to be in Omaha this weekend. Are you guys going to come out there and protest it?" And I said, "No, that's not what we do. We don't do that. If individual members choose to do it, that's fine, but that is not a function of what we do." And that was the end of the interview. So I'll just use that as a personal experience and say that's kind of what happens sometimes. So what we have here today is Victor Hahn has generated this idea to talk about moderates in politics and to discuss other topics as they come up. And we have two participants, Tom Becker, everybody knows, and Jim. Jim is the communications director for Jeff Fortenberry in Lincoln. And Jeff, Victor, I'm going to turn it over to you. And just so you know, again, housekeeping, please keep on mute. If you have a question that you want to enter, put it in the chat. And when it gets to the Q&A, I will unmute you to ask your question. And so with that, let's get going.
Okay, well, thank you, Mike. So yeah, this was my idea to talk about the moderate, because it seemed to me like we just weren't talking about this. You know, we want to think that they're out there, but I just don't see it in the media or anything. And I want to start with asking, why do we have so much extremism in our thinking these days? Media's push for viewership has resulted in extreme views getting the most notice, and I'm sure Tom Becca will talk about that a little later. When the public votes Democrat for president but keeps Congress Republican, or vice versa, consciously or unconsciously, I think they're really wanting the two sides to work together. We see that scenario over and over after elections. So why do we not see more candidates or congresspeople identify as moderate when they actually vote that way? The question that needs to be asked, is moderate a position that someone can take, or is it the eventual result of so much legislation due to compromise? There was a recent article I read this month from a website called The Moderate Voice. The writer was pretty clear that a third party with a moderate platform was needed because the current parties are corrupt and self-serving, tethered to lobbyists, special interests, and their own partisan bases, and unable to govern productively. And as an aside for me, that statement really it's about as flammable as the far right and the far left's proclamations of late. But I think it's a point that's well taken. It's a tough area to deal with. And ironically, the answer is all about not being extreme, but pulling together and still coming up with solutions. I do think the media is to blame a lot for this, and I get it. With fractured media, which once meant many different voices on multiple cable channels, to the huge addition in the modern world of blogs, Facebook, and multiple sites like Instagram, and then sites that promote conspiracy theories on the left and the right, it's no wonder the public is cynical, with many looking for some calm in the political tennis match that we seem to see and hear every day. So here's an example of an issue which, in my opinion, is just not dealt with rationally by either side. This is just kind of an example thing to throw out there. The issue of energy. And these are basic generalizations. The left looks at the oil industry as greedy, raking in billions and polluting the world. The right looks at the left and says, clean energy is not the solution. Oil is important. Why are the oil companies constantly demonized? And me as a public citizen, I want an honest politician to speak honestly about this to me, the average citizen, and just not politicize the issue based on their party affiliation. This is what I want to hear on this issue. There are 1.4 billion cars in the world. Do we need to recognize that oil is a finite energy source? Yes. Is it practical to spend ridiculous dollars converting all of these cars to clean energy or reduced emissions more than where they are now? No. That would be way too expensive, not practical. Eventually, long after we're gone, oil will run out and clean energy will be all that's left. So let's use oil in as practical a manner as we can right now with what we have and work toward the inevitable world of nothing but clean energy so we're ready when the time comes. I want to hear politicians speak honestly like that. And I don't understand why it's so hard for a politician to speak that way. I'm not in the political arena myself, so I can't honestly answer that, and it's not an arena I ever want to be in. But it's frustrating to watch people in Congress toe the party line and then at the last minute decide, well, I guess we can concede these few points as long as it doesn't go too far. For me, it was so aggravating to see some Republicans wait and wait to finally decide at the last minute for the impeachment of Trump. I want them to speak their mind, much like Mitt Romney, when they feel what's happening is wrong and do it right away, not wait until the appropriate time. I know there are some that do, but for me, not enough of them do. Every response seems to be robotically dictated by their party for so many of them, and I think frustration by the public and their elected officials partly explains the Trump phenomenon that we had before his election. He followed a different path, which to many seemed like a way out of the vicious political cycle we bemoan year after year. There are hot button issues, which I think the country needs to look at. And again, look at it in an honest way to find a solution that speaks of moderate thinking and planning as a viable path in the legislative branch on down to city governments. I hope we can talk about some of these topics this morning. I think city and local governments are more moderate than we realize because cities have to be more practical about solving problems. Their solutions directly affect their constituents in a more immediate way. When it's Washington, I think there's distance there that allows people to vent louder and speak in more extreme tones because they feel that's the only way to move things in any kind of direction. I think the public is generally wrong here. I think middle ground, if presented properly, can work and move things forward in a productive manner. I had an analogy a few months ago at a free speech meeting about people thinking moderately. And I said, if you can imagine an airplane, if you're looking at it from the top down, you'll see an airplane has a left wing and an airplane has a right wing. But where are all the people on a plane? They're right in the middle. And I think that's where a lot of people, more people want to be there than I think will admit it. I also firmly believe, as I stated at the beginning, when we have a Democratic Congress but a Republican president or vice versa, I see that as a signal over and over that the public really wants them to work together. It looks and feels like the public in their voting is purposely dividing up the situation, but I really feel the message is this. Both parties come from different sides. We, the public, want you to work this out, not fight it out and then pout in the corner. Come to an understanding of middle ground, which, FYI, for me, does not mean stalemate. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor. The format now, Victor will hand it off to your two chosen presenters, and you have 8 to 10 minutes. I'll watch the time, and I will put up a finger when we're at 1 minute. There we go, 1 minute. And so hopefully that'll help. So we want to start out with, I believe we want to start out with Tom. We discussed starting out with Tom Becca. Tom, you're going to have the floor now for 8 to 10 minutes, and I'm going to Hold the finger.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Keep a close watch on it. I'm going to start off here by saying, first of all, I feel like I have to defend the media once again, because we get blamed for everything. People in the media get blamed for everything. But I agree with you to a large extent, Victor, in that I look back on my career in talk radio, and I feel that, talk radio, going back now, 25 years or so now, was a part of this this lack of compromise in America. Listening to Rush Limbaugh back then, I remember him talking about the mushy moderates. And all of a sudden, so you had to be on this side or that side because, the people in the middle of the road, they're the ones that get hit. They're the ones that get run over. And that was and I was a part of that. I mean, I was a part of that. I admit, I liked it because it was fun. It was fun to stir up the emotions. It was fun to get people all riled up. But that's when I thought the adults were in charge. I thought the adults were in charge, and it's like, okay, we're just here, stirring the pot a little bit and that. Well, then in the last, number of years, turns out maybe the adults aren't really in charge, and that the people that want to try to find some form of cohesive agreement on things are getting out of politics, and the extremes are the ones that are staying in. And it's interesting because, you talk about the media on this. It's interesting because if you take a look at what the Republicans did here recently, when it came to Liz Cheney, about whether or not she should be able to still hold all of her positions and how they felt about Liz Cheney, when the Republicans met in private, they loved Liz Cheney, all right? But then when it came down to the Congresswoman in Georgia, whose name I refuse to mention, when it comes to her, they do it in public, and now everybody's got to be defending that. And that is not cohesive to any sort of compromise and understanding. And I think that's part of the problem is that, that if you're in the middle, if you're trying to find compromise, you get beat up from the far left to the far right. Let me give you an example from my personal experience. When, years ago, when George W. Bush was president, I was complaining about his deficit spending. Deficit spending has always been a big thing with me, regardless of who's in office. And so when he went and it was deficit spending, I was complaining about deficit spending. I get these people that were calling up and calling me a liberal. You liberal, how dare you criticize President Bush? And because I want less deficit spending. I'm a liberal for that. Then when Obama comes in and starts spending like George W. Bush on steroids, I start criticizing Obama. I get these same people calling me up saying, well, it's about time you started seeing things our way. This tribalism, this my side versus your side stuff. When the reality is that deficit affects Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, political agnostics. I mean, it affects everybody. Pete Ricketts, the other day on his, meet on the menu press conference, Joe Jordan asked Pete about, said, Governor, you were opposed to President Biden's coronavirus bailout. Are you going to take the money? It's about $1 billion. And Governor Ricketts says, well, yeah, I'm going to take the money. I mean, after all, that's our money. To which I said, is it really our money or is it our grandkids' money? We've got to look at the problems and look at realistic ways to fix them. And I mean, the immigration issue is another one right now that I'm so frustrated. DACA, and Rick DeLucia mentioned this, that Don Bacon voted along with the Democrats on this, and I support him entirely on this. When he voted, to help these people that are brought here as children, raised in American schools, speak English, they don't know anything about their native country, give them a chance to stay here in America without fear of being deported, so they can get married, raise kids, buy a house, live the American dream. Everybody says, well, they're here illegally. Well, I'm sorry. Rational thought would say, Yeah, but if you're 12 years old and you hold up a liquor store, when you become 19, they expunge that. You get to live your life. These kids were brought here. They didn't commit the crime. Their parents committed the crime. And we can't even have a rational discussion about this when something like 80% of Americans feel that something should be done about DACA and the Dreamers, right? But because the politicians on both sides can go and demonize that and use that as a fundraiser to get money into their coffers, they don't work together and just come up with a common sense solution of finding a way to make these people that were brought here through no fault of their own to be able to live in peace and security and live the American dream. I'm passionate about this because my parents were both raised. They were both first generation Americans. I'm sorry, second generation Americans. Or second generation Americans, but they were both raised in a Czech neighborhood in Cleveland. I mean, my mom didn't speak English until she went to school. All right, so I'm very much a big believer in immigration and the promise of America, and how we can't give that to these kids that were brought here as children. How we can't do that because of politics, when most of Americans, want that. It frustrates me. So, Victor, I got to disagree with you on one point. When you were talking about, the passion, and I think the middle needs to get mad. I think the middle need. I started this thing back in my talk radio days, about 15 years ago. I started something called the Mad Middle. I think I might have been a little bit ahead of my time on this, of just people that are tired of the far left and the far right and say, just figure some of this crap out. I think we need passion, because passion gets results. Passion gets people involved. So I think that the middle can't be a mushy moderate like Rush Limbaugh says. The middle's got to get up there and say, you guys work this out. Because the analogy I'll make here is that as a kid, if I was fighting with my sister or my brother, my dad would put us both in a room and say, you guys sit in there and you figure it out. You work it out. And they would close the door and you don't come out of this room until you figure it out. That's what the middle does. And that's what the middle should be doing. So there needs to be some passion there of people in the middle. But when you are in the middle like this, you are going to get, especially in this day and age of, social media and that, you're going to get beat up on both sides. You're going to get beat up on both sides from people that, think you're too liberal, you're too conservative. I get this off. I've gotten this a million times over the years, I'll say one thing. I'll say it. I will give my opinion on something, and I'm either too liberal or too conservative. So if you are giving that opinion, if you're trying to find somewhere in the middle, you're going to get beat up on both sides, and it's not always a pleasant place to be. But we got to get, I think, to deal with these issues, I think you got to get some people in the middle, and we need a charismatic leader to do it. I don't know who that charismatic leader would be. I think maybe Mark Cuban might be someone, with enough money and enough fame and power that might be able to pull something like this off. But, we need something like that. We need some charismatic leader to be like my dad was when we were kids, to just tell the far left and the far right to knock it off, get in that room, work it out, and come out with a solution. And don't worry about who takes the credit, who gets the credit or who gets the blame. Figure something out. And you're not going to please everybody, but at least, you're going to be moving forward. And I see that Mike just gave me the finger, so I will now wrap this up, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards.
Thanks, Tom. Victor, you want to go introduce James to us, and let James go?
Sure. I can introduce Jim. There's not too much to say other than he's the communications director for Jeff Fortenberry down in Lincoln. And as Jim stated earlier, this is going to be his thing. He's not going to really talk about his job per se, but this is going to be coming from him on the world of moderation. So Jim, it's your time.
Well, it's good to be with you guys. Thank you very much. Yes, I am the director of communications for Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, and I fell into the political world in an odd way. I grew up in Omaha, so my mom was very involved in Republican politics. Actually, I at 3 years old, there's an old picture of me in my high chair as a child, and behind me was a giant paper picture of Richard Nixon, a poster of Richard Nixon, huge. It's like Big Brother looking over my high chair. And I think occasionally unconsciously toss Gerber's back at it. But my mom was very political, and so the first words, and so she talked politics around the house a lot. And so the first words out of my mouth were de Gaulle, and Charles de Gaulle was president at the time. So that was my early political upbringing, but I never really got to it. I was a debater at prep. Some folks on the call me know that, and then I went and taught, after college, went and taught. Years later, I started an after-school program for inner city kids in the South Bronx, and I sort of got back into policy debate. But I've basically been in the publishing business most of my life. My own magazine, Monk, a travel magazine, and a bunch of books. And Tom, we've talked about the books and the movies I've done. One about the inner city kids I coached, and so I ended up covering education for Forbes for many years and writing about politics for HuffPost. So I've dealt with these issues indirectly and directly through my writing. But through Forbes, I ended up getting this gig for the congressman, and it's really been an incredible experience. I just want to say a couple things. That I'll get back to the points that you raised, Tom, and you did, Vic. But I'm, working deep inside the matrix, as it were, here on Capitol Hill. I live two and a half blocks from Longworth, which is one of the buildings in the Capitol complex. So I'm right near it. I see the congressmen and women all the time. AOC lives 3 blocks from here. I see her, when I go to Whole Foods. It's a tight little community. It's very interesting. Like, it's a small little village filled with people that represent a lot of other people. And the media, there's no blame to the media. I've come from the media. I've worked in the media all my life. But they don't see the collegiality that exists on the Hill. And as Tom rightly pointed out, and it's glad that Tom pointed out, obviously he's more prominent in this world than I am, but, the media's profit model is based on creating fight or flight anxiety. It's a PTSD model. And so the more PTSD that's created, the more anxiety, the more division, the better the ratings. So, and now that it's kind of, the media is kind of tied up with a technological imperative, where media is driven by tech. I mean, you can analyze much better than when I ran a magazine. I mean, the joke was, we don't know which 50% of our advertising works. We just know that 50% does. We don't know, we can't track it exactly, especially in a magazine. But God, you could track it now. You could see this in real time through behavioral marketing, what messaging is delivering, heat. And so, and I knew this at Forbes, because at Forbes, we would, I'd write pieces. I was technically the guy at Forbes covering education. But of course, when you're paid by how many clicks you get and how many shares, it kind of forces you into a model of link bait. You're going to write about things that get the most traffic. You get paid based on your traffic. And so that model was started by Forbes, but is ubiquitous now. And so that's the underlying techno-capitalist imperative at play that is forcing division on the world, because it generates profit. Okay. And it also applies in politics, because people aren't going to write a check to a moderate. They're not going to write a check to a moderate, so-called moderate, right? The people with skin in the game are going to write a check to somebody who aligns with their perspective. Now, most of the time, politicians, they're not taking positions they don't personally align with. And so the people who are donating to them personally align with those positions. So it's not kind of how the media portrays it, like I'm taking money just because I need the money. It's usually, there's enough people in your lane of your belief to finance your campaign. But to circle back to my first point, you don't go into this work. Like I see this now firsthand. I when I wrote about it for HuffPo, I'm looking at the fishbowl. I'm in the fishbowl. And I can tell you from experience that you don't go into this work unless you have what I call a spiritual calling for it. And those who do it best have a spiritual calling, because the amount of hate and venom directed towards a politician for saying the most innocuous thing. Tom puts out a good example, to be called liberal for something that's clearly a conservative position and vice versa, that's daily bread and butter in this work, right? So not only do you have to have a thick skin, you have not only be able to take it, you have to be able to transmute it. You almost have to be a kind of, Tibetan monk. You have to take it and turn it into something good, right? And that's the daily art of the job. And so a couple things. There is a lot of compromise that goes on beneath the media exploitation of it, and that's beneath the social media exploitation of it. I mean, you'd be shocked at some of the people who've signed onto bills. The person I work for is the leader in Congress in terms of protecting religious minorities in northern Iraq. His home city of Lincoln, Congressman Fortenberry's home city of Lincoln, is home to the largest community of Yazidis in America. It's an endangered religious minority that suffered genocide at the hands of ISIS. And now we could debate how ISIS grew, perhaps, and partially I think it's true, out of some of the failures of the Iraq War. Nevertheless, this is a group that suffered genocide. And so we have shocking people that you would say, oh, they're far left, they're part of the squad or whatever. They come together with us on this issue. So politics makes strange bedfellows is cliche, but it really does happen. The problem, the core problem, is that the attention of the country, the attention of the media is on the palace intrigue. And as Vic and Tom alluded, a lot of politics, the most direct experience you have of politics is on a local level, is the pothole on the street, your local taxes, zoning ordinances, things like that. That's very, very local. And one of the things, not to get all geeky about this, but I went to St. John's College for my master's, which is called the Great Book School, started in Annapolis, but also, in Santa Fe. I went to both campuses. I got to read de Tocqueville's Democracy in America. This is a guy, a Frenchman in, I think, the 1830s. He spent 11 months in the country, and he fully understood the country, and his insights are still true today. And the thing he marveled at was that the American democratic experience is so rich on such a hyper local level. Like the engagement is robust on very local levels, and that keeps the country strong, and it keeps each other connected to each other. And in a way, it solves this problem of the extremes. But what's happened, and the Congressman and I talk about this a lot, is that really it started with FDR, and it was a necessary intervention of the federal government into a similar disaster that we've had here with COVID, but the intervention in the economy during the Great Depression and then continuing through World War II continued after that. And what happened is, it's not just a Republican or Democratic problem that the government became so involved in American life. The federal government became so involved in American life. But the tendency of the people in this country now is to think that everything, every solution flows from the federal government. And so, therefore, if that's what people are thinking, then naturally the media is going to gravitate towards what's going on the federal level. And what the Congressman and I call the palace intrigue gets fed more and more. And so if we really want a return to a sort of moderate view there's a couple things that need to happen. We have to start as individuals. We can't wait for the politicians who are the last to act. They're responding to us. So we as individuals need to stop thinking in such a binary, dualistic way and be that change on a local level. And two, second of all, stop thinking this is where I kind of disagree with Tom with all due respect. I think the problem is we keep thinking there's a Messiah. You know, Obama is the Messiah. Trump is the great, strong leader. All these things are fundamentally at odds with what makes America great. Not great in the Trump or Reagan sense, but just the richness of the connectivity on a local level is the key. So we need to stop that, constantly thinking, oh, the solution's coming from government. No, the solution comes from civic institutions, from discussions like this, from folks embedded in community, from a revitalization of social engagement through civic organizations. That's where the change will happen. And I'll just leave with one quote. I lived in New York and LA most of my life, and I interviewed Ed Koch one time, and former mayor. He's a character, total character. And I mean, I've interviewed people from across the political spectrum, but Ed Koch says something really funny and true. He said, if you agree with me on 8 of 12 things, vote for me. If you agree with me on 12 of 12 things, see a psychiatrist. So that's the point. Like, we have now enabled a sort of cancel culture on steroids, where confirmation bias is not only the result, it's required for entry into the club. That's not something that can get changed by fiat from the government. It changes within. We need to stop asking that of each other. And then we'll find that it flows into our civic institutions.
Thank you, James. Tom,
I'm muted.
go ahead.
Can I add something to what Jim said? Because Jim, I'm going to agree with you and disagree with you at the same time over the same thing. Because I thoroughly agree with you that it does boil down to us, okay? But yet, when you're looking for a boogeyman, who do you blame? The media. Well, the reality is it's the consumers of the media, because that's what they want. They want the fight. They want the hassle. They want that conflict. I mean, just in our everyday lives, to put this analogy that I've used a million times, so many of you may have heard it already, but it's like, we just had a couple weeks ago, we had like 30 below weather, right? 30 below. And my goodness, there was all sorts of talk about power going out, the electric grid, what's happening down in Texas, people freezing and all. I mean, we could talk about that weather for hours. If it's 72 and sunny, sure is a nice day. And that's it. So I agree with you. It does come down to us. It does come down to us. But but I think that just the easy excuse is, well, the media is doing this.
Well, sorry.
No, the media's providing a service, and then this. And by the way, and I'll close with this, and I'll let you speak. Years ago, when Barack Obama put the line in the sand when it came to Syria, and my fingers may be off just a little bit, okay? There were like 3 times as many stories about Barack Obama and Syria as there were at the same time that Lady Gaga did her twerking thing with what's his face, the Canadian singer. She did that twerking controversy, right? So there were 3 times more stories online about Syria, but the twerking incident got twice as many hits. Okay, so the information is out there. The information about people, about the media compromising and everything is out there, but if people don't want to buy it. I mean, that's where I say you got to get some passion on the middle to get people involved so that, they understand that it's okay to compromise.
Listen, I think you kind of agree with what I'm saying, which is, and I think we both agree, like, I'm not blaming the media. I mean, the media is a profit-making enterprise with the exception of, public media, which I think is important to talk about, by the way. But, and yes, it does reflect what people want. I mean, if you generate controversy, right? You're going to get more traffic, and it's what the people want to talk about. I get that. Which is, again, why it does come back to each of us. We are powerless in a way over to change what goes on in media and social media. But we could choose to not feed it. We could choose to not engage in the food fight. That's what I call it. We get calls all the time. CNN, New York Times, you name it. They want to put a token Republican on with 4 other heavily biased liberals or Democrats, and they would have a food fight. And then and Fox does the same model. You got Juan Williams and 4 other people on the 5, and it's a joke. It's like, this is not moderation. This is not a reasoned discussion where we respect each other. I mean, to some extent it's respectful, but the bottom line is people are divided up into teams. And in a way, that's okay, because I've come to this belief that social media, especially, offers a kind of catharsis. So I'm a big free speech guy, and this is a free speech society. And so I do think crazy stuff should be allowed to be said, right? You should be able to say what you believe. You should, even if it's completely unfounded, right? It should be allowed in social media. The thing that's changed is there's very few, the culture seems to lack the ability to judge what's true and what's false. It's almost like the problem is education. This is why I got into teaching policy debate, teaching critical thinking skills, so you can understand what's good evidence based on real studies that were good studies, and what's poppycock, which is just completely made up baloney. And there are so many people out there that believe false things. It's insane. It's the country cannot continue if that many people believe in things that just aren't true. And the problem is that a lot of people believe that things aren't true. For example, we didn't land on the moon, or that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11, or that OJ didn't kill Nicole Brown Simpson, on and on and on, right? That there's a QAnon conspiracy. I mean, both sides have insanity, right? The thing is, though, each side has the kernel of truth. In some of those conspiracies is a kernel of truth. And where the media can play a role, Tom, is not ending the food fight, but being a voice of moderation and saying, yeah, but here's the thing. You might have a good point here, but underneath it, I'll take the case that's probably caused the most controversy on this call. I can bring it up now. There's 2 cases that I think where this resulted in terrible outcomes for the country. The first was the death of George Floyd. The question based on that horrible, tragic incident is what is the proper use of police force? That's a question that should cut across Republicans and Democrats. What is the proper use of the police force? And are police properly trained to handle situations like that? Instead, the George Floyd thing became captive of right and left interests. Are you for police? Are you anti-police? Should we defund the police? It's about white supremacy and et cetera, et cetera. The core question is, what's the proper use of police force? Not these other issues. The second issue where this comes up is in the election, the 2020 election, which, because of people misunderstanding basic facts, ended up in a riot 2 blocks from where I live, 3 blocks from where I live, 1.5 blocks from where I live. A bomb was detonated, okay, successfully. So I didn't die and the people around it didn't die. 2.5 blocks from me, another bomb was detonated. So I live very near the Democratic headquarters and the Republican headquarters. So the consequences of the insanity and what I call the swirl, the food fight, are real now. They're clear. So did the people protesting the election, are they completely out of their mind? Did they have no basis in fact? The truth is, they had a little bit of fact there. The truth is, do state election officials have the right to unilaterally change state election law without the approval of a state legislature during an election. They do not. It's unconstitutional, but it happened. Unfortunately, the president, those opposing the president, the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, the media, social media, all got involved in this question, and it became about all kinds of other stuff, when really it was that question. So the media does play a role, Tom, in getting to the core point and try to get people to calm down and look at a question that is a legitimate question.
But okay, and I'll get all this point because I don't got questions. Let me just make this point. Yeah, okay, so the media, which I hate that term like it's all one big monolithic thing.
No,
but,
I get it. Custodians of the media, talk show hosts.
When Fox News said that Donald Trump won Arizona, what happened? Their viewers went away. It's like, here you are, they're telling the truth. They are telling the truth. Here it is. They're telling the truth, and then they all went away. So yeah, so the truth is out there, but if people don't want to hear it, I mean, you've got elected officials that got elected because they bought into the lies, and this is where I find it so frustrating. I think that when I first started doing talk radio, way back when, Republicans were calling my show and saying that they were complaining about the dumbing down of America, until they realized they could benefit from it. And that's the sad part about it, because education is the key. I don't care what your thoughts are. If you have a different opinion than mine, but it's based in fact, great, we can have a discussion. But if you start off by saying that we never landed on the moon, I got nothing to talk to you about. Okay, now.
Victor, do you want to jump in?
Sure. That was a nice back and forth between these two. Well, there's a lot of directions we can go with this. I guess one thing I wanted to do, and this is to get opinions from Jim, Tom, and anybody else that wants to type in, is hot button topics. I was thinking about this, a week or two ago, and I thought, there's two that come to mind for me, that I think most people, when they're brought up, it's far left, far right answers. They go here. Absolutely no way you're not changing this. Yes, we have to change it. And the two I'm thinking of are gun control and abortion. In my mind, I guess I'd like to see what the other guys have to say, and if anybody else would. But in my mind, have a moderate solution for both of these. At least in my mind, I think that would be at least a start for both sides to say, oh, okay, well, that's a reasonable way of looking at it, so that we can calm down, whenever something flares up. Anytime the whole abortion thing gets going, boy, you get the left all antsy and the right gets really antsy, and then it just becomes, as Jim says, a big food fight. So I guess I want to throw it out to you guys. I don't know if you want to hear what you think I think on the whole idea of abortion. I'll throw it out there, and then you guys can maybe discuss it, and other people can bring it up. But to me, we've got the left who says, the women say, absolutely not, it's my body. I have to do what I want to, I am complete control of my body. And I hear that over and over again, and it's like there's no other discussion. So the right says, no, you're killing a human being when you do that. Okay. So I didn't look up the statistic on how many people, how many abortions are performed every year. I know that there's still a lot performed on those, as far as that goes. But my middle solution is, couldn't we encourage women, instead of having an abortion, to give up the child, to have the child and give it up for adoption? Because I know that there are a lot of people that are waiting for children. They're on waiting lists to get children. And I don't know if, getting the government involved in that, it's going to be a whole other challenge that people are going to say, we don't need the government involved in something like that. But I think it's something to look at, as sort of a middle solution, saying, yeah, we're still going to allow you to have abortion, but we would like to encourage maybe some people to have this option so that other people can have a child in their lives that otherwise can't.
I could weigh in on that just from my office's perspective. I mean, this is such a necessary discussion. So I'll say two quick things. First of all, and the position I'm only speaking for myself, is, again, to my other analogies in terms of the election, a legitimate question there, in terms of the use of police force in the case of George Floyd and beyond, a legitimate question here. And so what's the legitimate question here when we talk about the abortion debate? And we have a bill in my office called Care for Her. Now, if you read the bill, you think that's a really far left Democratic idea. What's the idea? That a woman, when she is pregnant, knows that we have all the resources available to her. So she's not making a decision whether to have a child or not based on lack of money, lack of education, lack of a father, lack of a supportive community, lack of other support mechanisms she needs, healthcare, et cetera. So if we change the debate, change the frame, we go, whoa, it's really about, do we care for her? And I think and we have Democrats supporting this concept. So that's the current food fight in this specific issue is vicious and nasty. And the problem is, if you go up there and you say, well, what we really need to talk about is the continuity of human dignity, and you'll go to a left-wing group and they'll say, are you pro-choice or not? And you go to a right-wing group and you go, are you pro-life or not? And those two extremes are going to exist. You know, you're powerless to change them, really. But there's a group of people, and I think you pointed this out very well, that are sitting in the middle of the airplane, and the wings are on the left and the right. Clearly, we need the wings to fly, so we need the extremes to fly, is another way to put it. But in the middle are the passengers. And I think that they're not often, a lot of these people, in the food fight. So if you start talking in a way about specific issues like this in a new language that is not in the language of the two sides in the food fight, we could start, this is not going to happen overnight, but we could start to slowly move towards a new consensus in this country, which is simple. No woman, when she's pregnant, should feel that she is alone.
Good point. May I just make a point? Good job, Jim. Bringing into the middle other issues that affect that particular topic is poverty, economics, social supports, state and federal, religious groups, education. That can bring things more in the middle, because once again, you're not talking just of this person isn't victimized by the society they're in. It will help them a level field for this individual. You know, maybe more opportunities for Head Start, child care that the government can be involved in. Why not pass parts of the Equal Rights Amendment so the woman makes the same amount as a man to support that child? Again, you're bringing other topics in to narrow it more to the middle. And this could probably apply to almost gun control, government spending, you name the topic. You're right, you could get the left and the right more in the middle if you include more support options to resolve a particular problem. I think that's where you're going.
I mean, anytime that the government, anytime anybody says, a Republic, for example, says, well, we're going to have, we're going to spend more of your money to take care of somebody. Well, that's a, immediately that stops the discussion.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with like global warming. That's another example. In our office, what we've discovered, the congressman and I, and we're good friends, we become friends through this process because we're not about scoring political points. We're about the belief, very strong belief, that rhetoric creates reality, and that bills come and go, and it's really hard to pass legislation. So, but what can we do? We can change the way that people talk about these things. We could change the way people think about these things. And the congressman, to his credit, sees that on so many issues, not just care for her and pregnant women, also on healthcare and on climate change or global warming. Like, if you say the words climate change or global warming to the farmers of Cherry County, Nebraska, and the ranchers out there, it's a non-starter. But if you talk about conservation, which people in the ag field understand implicitly, if you talk about environmental security, and you don't talk about it in a language that's not triggering all the time, so that we're always in the food fight and we're always in the PTSD, then slowly, I'm not saying this is miracle work here, it's not going to be easy, but we have to talk about it in a way that invites consensus.
Right, and it focuses it down to the middle.
Jim, two things occurred to me. The first is, one of the problems one has is agreeing on what is the essential question. There may be disagreement about what is really the essential question. The second thing that I think is useful is to have people who are wedded to either the left or the right in an argument over any issue, be it abortion or climate change. Say to them, in order to take your position, I want you first to argue the opposing point of view. Because if you look, just to take abortion as an example, there are really good arguments to be made in favor of pro-life. And there are really good arguments to be made in favor of pro-choice. If you understand the position of your, not enemy, but opponent, then it seems to me you have the chance to work together. I was at a party, sitting down. I'm as far left on the spectrum as you can get. And the fellow I was talking to was as far right as you could get. And we talked for about half an hour, and we discovered this. On about 80% of the things we were talking about, we more or less agreed. On about 20%, we disagreed clearly. And I said, isn't it time for us to spend some effort dealing with that 20% and finding a way to get something that works, that doesn't outrage either one of us?
I mean, it's a Venn diagram. We often talk about the Venn diagram and the unsexy middle, you know, as we talked about earlier. And, you know, that's why I taught debate, John, is because you have to take a position that you may not personally agree with. Now, the danger in debate, and I made a movie after I made Crowdy's Kids called Master Debaters, pardon the pun, but it was about the dangers, the nihilism that can come from not having a core belief system so that you could take either side, and in a way it's interchangeable. And that's also not what we want, John, I'm sure. I mean, you have your principles, and the person you're talking about has their principles. And the thing is, we share principles. And so what that's the thing, like, what is it that we can talk about in a calm, decent way? I'm not talking pablum here. I'm talking about having real debates. I mean, we're talking about Hegelian synthesis, right? You said you're an anarcho-syndicalist before the call. You know, you understand Hegel, you understand thesis, antithesis, synthesis. I mean, in some ways, maybe the culture is creating that anyway. So what we think is really the food fight is really a move towards a new synthesis. I sometimes have that faith that that's actually happening, right? So we're not, it's not the end of times. Like, we're really engaged in it as a culture. So, you know.
There's another, what I consider to be very serious problem. And that is a decision on the part of a significant number of our citizens to not educate themselves sufficiently to meet their responsibilities, because our founders said the only way this experiment could work is if we have an intelligent, informed citizenry. I don't know about you, but when I was in the 9th grade, every single person in the state school system took a class in civics. That's no longer the case. And as a professor, I run across time and time and time again, people in their 30s and 40s, much like our previous president, who know absolutely nothing about our political system, who know nothing about the Constitution, who know nothing about the way law works. If you ask someone, are we a democracy? They say, of course, we're a direct democracy. And I say, well, not really. And it's, I would say, an intellectual laziness, which is brought on by the fact that for so many, we are overstimulated by relatively useless, nonsensical things.
Can I insert myself in this? Mike, I
go
don't know
ahead,
if you're
Terry.
recognizing questioners, but
That's what I was going to move to. Go ahead,
Yeah.
Terry.
I'd like to get back to this idea of where are the moderates, how is there moderation of the political process and so on. Seems to me that anytime that you are talking about a political process, you're effectively talking about power, aren't you? And the problem I see right now is that, and if you assume that there is this moderate group in the middle, and using the airplane analogies, a left wing and a right wing, but everybody is in the center. And I think that's true. Sometimes my belief in that gets shaken, but I believe that that's true, and that most people are in that moderate center. The problem is, in my view, those folks have no ability to assert any kind of political influence. Because right now you've got the both of the parties have been essentially captured by certain dogmas, certain positions, both on the left and the right. There's nothing left in the middle for the moderates to assert any kind of political power relative to those wings. So then that's where we need mechanisms, it seems to me, to try to respond to that. And Tom Beckett talked earlier about somebody kind of rising that could be a leader of the middle. I think that may be part of the answer, because somebody needs to stimulate that idea that, well, the moderates can organize and are not reliant on the Republicans and the Democrats anymore to do that for them. And there are other mechanisms, I think, when you talk about ranked choice voting, in which you remove the dichotomy of choice, so that, the person I vote for never gets elected because I'm clearly a minority. But it's mechanisms like that that need to be looked at, and how they then relate to the power of the people out there. Again, if we assume that the majority of people out there are moderate, there needs to be some mechanism for those people to have a voice and can assert their power, and then say, oh yes, this is how we can influence what goes on in politics. Maybe it's a third party. I think maybe Victor, you mentioned a third party, and I think that probably the time is right for that third party now. But again, it seems to me it's going to require somebody who can do some organizing and try to appeal to that moderate center. And again, apologies to Tom Beckett, sometimes I think that's difficult in the current media environment. But again, it just seems to me that if we're talking about moderates and where they are and what they're going to do, it's a question of power. And how do those people recover the power that they may have had in one party or another over the course of the last 40 or 50 years?
One of the problems with approach like that, first of all, I am very suspicious of charismatic leaders. Our experience with charismatic leaders historically, and I'm a professor of history, has not been very good. they often lead us into very difficult places. The second point is that there are people on the left and right, not the far left and far right. There are people on the left and right who are genuine and who have good ideas. To assume that because you are liberal or conservative, that you are therefore wrong instead of being a moderate, I think is a dangerous position. The point I'm trying to make is that if left and right don't know how to talk to each other, that's not useful. The January 6th experience leads me to believe that I am a dedicated Democrat, okay? We need to discover, for us Democrats, all those Republicans who voted for President Trump, who are nothing like the people who ransacked the Capitol. We need to discover what their beliefs are, what their attitudes are, what their issues are. And then we can have a productive exchange, because hopefully we'll all be talking based upon facts.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah,
I've got 2 points and then I'll shut up. One, I'm not talking about a charismatic leader. I'm not talking about a Hitler or someone like that. I'm talking about, and there are examples of this in history, John Kennedy, Barack Obama, people who were recognized as leaders and people followed them. They're not radicals. I mean, Kennedy was probably as conservative as a lot of conservative Republicans right now.
Exactly.
I'm not talking about a charismatic leader. I'm talking about somebody who has the personality and the ability and the vision to go forward with that. And the other thing is, we talk about, oh, we got to get the left and the right talking to each other and so on. That's a fool's errand. That's a fool's errand. You've got to have an alternative for people out there to say, okay, this is really what I believe, and this is how we're going to organize around more moderate positions and such. Then you're going to find those who voted for Trump and aren't committed Trumpsters are going to be attracted to that. I don't think you can go out and identify them and try to attract them. I think you got to move in a direction and then believe that those people who are more moderate are going to follow, are going to attach to that. So anyway, that's enough.
I
Gary,
want
you
to
mentioned
address
ranked
this.
choice voting. You mentioned ranked choice voting. I'm not sure everybody knows what that is, because I think ranked choice voting is, one of the keys to this. And ranked choice voting, just as a quick synopsis here, you vote for number 1, number 2, and number 3. This is your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. So that way, maybe your first choice doesn't win, but the second choice does. And maybe everybody's second choice, if everybody has the same second choice, they end up winning the election, as opposed to the radicals on either side. So what you end up having here is people that maybe aren't thrilled with their candidate, but at least you don't have to keep on going and just trying to appeal to the extremes. With ranked choice voting, you don't say such bad things about your opponent because you at least want to be that person's second choice. I think ranked choice voting is definitely something we need to seriously look at as a way to at least move towards more moderation and more civility in our politics.
I wanted to ask James, Jim, I wanted to ask your opinion on this discussion so far. Let me throw this out to you because of what Kerry said, and that is that the moderate center needs to have a power structure in order to help advance that type of thinking. So I'm a longtime member of No Labels, and our congressman in district number 2 here, Don Bacon, is a member of the Problem Solvers Coalition in Congress, of which we have almost 60 members now, if I am correct. That sounds like a power base. That sounds like a caucus of sorts. Would Fortenberry like to join something like that? And can we talk about what problem solvers can do as a base of power as far as moderate thinking and ideas?
Well, I can't speak for the congressman. Obviously, I'm speaking as a private person. I'm not trying to be coy about that, but I just can't speak about what he would do. But he has been involved in many of these types of things and is to this day part of various caucuses. He's on caucuses that are primarily run by Democrats. He's one of the co-chairs of the Organics Caucus. And there's this sort of idea that Republicans are against organic food or the farm to table movement. And that's all wrong. I mean, he's the ranking member on the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Agriculture, Rural Development, and Drug Administration. I mean, we oversee the food you eat. I mean, and the food we give to the poor and the poor around the world, poor in America and around the world. So, and then by the way, as an aside, there's one beautiful thing about working for somebody who's one of the top ranking people in the world on agriculture, is that agriculture is a place where we don't have quote unquote food fights, pun intended. I mean, if you listen in on those subcommittee hearings, it's not filled with the Sturm und Drang and the binary thinking that is played in the media, because there's consensus in America that America feeds the world, feeds America, feeds the world. We have the most productive ag community in the world, and the job of the government is to make sure that stays that way. And it's complicated by all sorts of other policy dynamics. But we all come, and I come from Nebraska. My dad was raised on a farm in South Dakota that blew away in the drought of the 30s, and he was a poor farm kid and worked 5 jobs, put himself through school, and became a doctor. But bottom line is, we're from an ag state, and actually food is something that where there's consensus. So it's a bit of a detour, but the thing is, beneath the surface, this stuff does go on. Is what I said at the beginning. Like, there is a lot of dialogue. There is a lot. It's gotten harder and harder and harder. And so I want to address what Carrie said and what John said, because I think John makes a good point. I mean, without robust civics education, not with a political slant like critical race theory or something, like, no, just basic civics. Like, are we all in agreement that we believe in the American experiment, the American idea? I mean, to me, that's like fundamental. If you do not, and I also, by the way, think that we should allow voices that reject the American idea. That I do think we should allow the teaching of critical race theory, that America is a racist. All those views, Marxism, anarcho-syndicalism, whatever you want. I think that's fine. That falls under free speech. But I think when you're, 9, 10, 11 years old, you need to know that the place you're living in, what its story is and what its fundamental institution is and how it's founded and the way the government works. And that's not happening as it used to be. And that might be, I'm not a political scientist, but that might be part of the problem. So that's on that point. So I think civics education is key. But the other problem, and by the way, I know about no labels. I think that was founded by Bloomberg. I could be wrong, but I thought it was, but I could be wrong. I know he founded something like that. Is the problem we're facing now is this loyalty oath thing. I do appreciate the desire to find the Republicans. I think John said this, or maybe it was Kerry, but the Republicans who, that you feel are reasonable. The problem is, you have to check your own bias just on this call. Like, I see the bias, I hear the bias. So you have to check. Like, I know there's a lot of venom towards our former President Trump, but if everything is funneled through the evil Trump, you'll never ever get to consensus with Republicans, because it's become an ad hominem argument, and that sucks all the energy into it. So instead, let's stop talking about personalities. Stop requiring loyalty oaths of, you have to hate Trump, you have to deny Trump, then we'll talk to you. That's not an effective strategy.
But Jim, and I agree with you on that. But at the same time, what about the loyalty oath with the people that were so pro-Trump? I mean, I had a conversation.
Oh, I don't disagree with that, by the way.
With a rather high-ranking local Republican, statewide Republican person here in the state, and this is going back about 2-3 years ago. We were talking about this, and I pointed out all the things about Trump that I didn't like. I mean, his rhetoric, the deficit spending, all the way. Right? This is before COVID, long before COVID, and I went down the list of all these things I didn't like, and he agreed with me on every point. And then he said, "But I'm still going to support him." And I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, that's my team." He says, "Tom, you're a Cleveland Browns fan, right? That's your team. the Republican Party, this is my team. And I said, yeah, but I can at least admit when my team sucks. Okay. And the problem is with both the Republicans and the Democrats is that they're afraid to speak out against their leadership. It's afraid to speak out, at least publicly, against, when their team sucks. Okay. And that's part of the problem. The tribalism that's a part of this.
I agree with that.
Yeah. And it's on both sides. Yeah. I mean, look what's happening with the Republicans who want to, be more like the old school Republicans. They're getting out of the game.
Yeah. Well, let me just say a couple quick, I'm sorry to interrupt whoever spoke, but the problem is, the Democrats like the Republicans who are, they're sort of nice, cuddly Republican like Romney, right? They like that. That's always a typical Democrat thing. And I like Mitt Romney. I voted for Mitt Romney. He's the first Republican I ever voted for. I thought he was a good man. In fact, I think the reason partially he lost this is because he wasn't really good at tooting his own horn. He was so humble in a way, it hurt him. All right. But the problem is, Tom, the system is set up. If you go out, the cancel culture is so strong on both sides that you can't. Yeah, it's nice. It would be nice if people would go away from their team, their home team, right? But the problem is, when you go against your team, it's not like there's another team over there going, God, man, thanks for coming to the discussion about the reasonable center here. Gosh, you're so moderate. It's really great. Let's work things out. You know what happens when you go against your team? The other team goes, ha, ha, ha. Boom, boom, boom. And it's like everybody's in the food fight. And so until we as a people say, we're not interested in the food fight. And I know that's what we're saying on this call, but we're still not acting that way. And so nobody can take that risk. Like to go out on a limb and say, whatever, whoever you think is wrong in your own party, you think the squad is crazy, you think Ilhan Omar is an anti-Semite, you think whatever you think, right? You think Marjorie Taylor Greene is insane, right? Whatever you think. The bottom line is there's another side willing to use it to crush you.
Are term limits the answer?
What?
I think that's a kind of, anyway, I don't want to weigh in on that because I think other people need to talk, but
one of the
Can I
things
say
that
something?
one of the things that might be useful, and this as I get older has informed a good deal of what I believe, is to keep in mind that you could be dead wrong. If you keep that kind of humility, that this stuff that I've believed all my life, nah, it's not it. If you approach these discussions with the notion that you might be wrong, it seems to me that you will be more willing to listen.
Okay, I'm going to cut in here. We have a lot of questions that have been posted, and so I wanted to give Mark or Terry an opportunity to weigh in on the conversation. I see you've posted questions, so kind of want to widen the circle a little bit.
I posed
Terry-
a question earlier.
Are they still with us?
I don't know, but I posted a question earlier on the chat.
Go ahead. Go ahead. What's your question, Ken?
Yeah, Ken had one right off the bat.
It's not just the media. I mean, the question is, are there other influences to this problem other than the media? Like one person, such as Donald Trump, dominating the Republican Party, and anybody who opposes him is going to be, they're going to run another candidate or whatever. They're going to try to force that person out or try to censor them or whatever. And, on the other side, the progressives pressuring President Biden. There's other forces here that are affecting the desire to negotiate or whatever other than the media. So my question is, aren't there other factors for party polarization besides the media?
And I'm going to jump in real quick and to add one more to that, and that is the influence of money in politics. So are there outside forces that are disruptors?
I agree.
Is that for me or for?
It's also education.
Whoever.
It's also education. To Jim's point, about teaching civics and that. It's about education. If people understand what the promise of America is supposed to be, and we over the years we've called it a great melting pot. I like to think of it more as a stew, where you have all these individual flavors that come together for a great thing, as opposed to one homogenous. It doesn't mean we all have to be homogenous. It doesn't mean we all have to agree and just smile and nod and say everything is peachy keen. But if you have, like a stew, you got the beef, you got the potatoes, you got the carrots, you got the peas, you got the gravy, you got all that, for a delicious meal. And I think that's what America should be. I think education is also a key, besides just, the media and money, which maybe all ties in with media and money. But I think the more people understand what this country is supposed to be and basic civics, the better off we're going to be.
How do people feel about public funding of elections? Take money out of it. How do you feel about that?
I'll say something really quick. I mean, this is something that I don't think America would ever get to, but there's something to me really appealing about the way Britain does Parliament, because they have like this 3-month window where they're like, okay, you're running 3 months, there you go, and now we're going to vote. I like that because they have very little time to make their point, and they have to be pretty succinct about things. I just throw my hands up when I think, oh my God, it's a year and a half before the election, and there's 20 people that want to run. I'm like, really? We're going to deal with that for 18 months with the media? I kind of throw my hands up at that, and I look at the political process and could we, make it a little more concise and basically get to the point is what I'm trying to do.
I agree.
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever get to a point where I don't want the government to fund the elections. I don't want that, only because then the government gets to decide, who gets the money. I do think.
No.
I might put a limit on how much people can donate, and I might try to get rid of the PACs and the dark money, and do that. But I don't like government funded elections.
Okay. We got another question here going, and the question is certainly about education, and that's been brought up by a couple of people. Is the what bothers me about that whole question about education and the educated voter? Whatever that happened to discernment? Why are we not talking a little bit more about discernment? And so we started out this whole free speech society about what is truth. And I think that's still where we are. And if anything, it's become a little worse. James, did you want to comment on that? How do you personally, and what do you feel about how you represent this I do know sort of thing?
Yeah, there's two things that were profoundly transformative for me in my life that helped me develop, or maybe three, that helped me develop some discernment. Not that I'm a great practitioner of it all the time, and certainly I have strong opinions about things, obviously, but that helps me listen more deeply. And I think, honestly, and those, I'm going to say what those three things are, and then I'm going to present the problem, which I think has been raised on this call, is, are we mature enough to vote for and support people that are willing to say, I don't know? So that's just a question to hold while I explain this to you, because it's a weakness in us as people that we always need somebody with an answer. Like, some things, they're not easy answers, okay? And sometimes we need leaders who say, I don't have the ready answer, but I'm going to listen and I'm going to look deeply into it, and we're going to find an answer that works. So there's those three things I did in life. Then I was lucky to do them because I was the last kid cut from the Creighton basketball team. I got into debate, which was competitive, and Vic knows that. And it allowed me to hear the other side, research the other side, provide evidence for contrary positions. So as a practical matter, I feel it's so important, just in Omaha, that the public school system require training in policy debate, not Lincoln Douglas debate, which is great, not public forum debate, policy debate. Because policy debate, to make a position, you have to have evidence, and good evidence to back it up. You can't just make the claim. You have to have a warrant, as we call it, for your claim, right? And then the debate is about the warrant, the evidence, which is what we should be doing. What's the evidence for your claim? So the first thing is policy debate. And I think it should be widely taught. I see debate programs now starting in junior high schools in New York City and elsewhere. We need to have that across the curriculum, debate across the curriculum. The second thing that was very important to me, now I come from a Roman Catholic background. I gained a lot from that. But then in my 20s, learning about the teachings of Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, and this idea that, our inability to understand reality as it is because we're caught up in anger, ignorance, and desire. And so we see things as an other. There's an other, but that's an illusion. There is no other. We're fighting phantoms all day long because we don't understand the true nature of reality. And the third thing, and this was great in middle life, in my 40s, I went back and got a master's degree at St. John's College, as I mentioned. And the whole base, and when I went there, I thought, well, I just want you to, teach me the didactic method I learned as an undergrad, what Plato thinks, what Aristotle thinks, what Hegel, what Nietzsche thinks, right? That's what I wanted. And I quickly learned that the whole pedagogy of St. John's is listening, asking a good question. This isn't a great book because it can be easily understood. Like, I'm rereading the short stories of Flannery O'Connor now with my family. And she's a genius as a writer. Went to the Iowa Writers Workshop. And there's no easy answer of what Flannery O'Connor is saying about race in this story. The thing is, if it's a great work, it transcends the time and place in which it was written. And so St. John's taught me that, how to ask a good question. So the solution really is, and they may lose. These candidates may lose. But we as people, and then people as political representatives, need to get into a frame of mind which says, I don't know. I don't know. You're not the problem. So I don't know. You're not the problem. You're not my enemy. And finally, but here's some good questions. Let's talk about it. I think it will lead to better discourse, lead to better candidates, lead to better representation. And I think, we in Nebraska understand this because we're the home of the unicameral legislature. We get this. We're hungry for this. But I think that's the way we get there.
Mark has a question. Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, thank you. I want to go back to some comments that were made earlier on the local government and how by necessity it has to be more moderate. Because you're problem solving, you are really seeing your constituents on a daily basis. You have to be more accountable, and maybe we could talk about I think, and I don't know if this is maybe it's always been the case, but I see a lot of people saying that good, smart, problem solving people don't want to get involved in high level politics anymore, and that. Really, it's the narcissists, it's the ego-driven individuals that pursue that. It's too difficult to get in. It's too painful, quite frankly. But I think it's hopeful to talk about the local government, and I would encourage people to get involved in that. Maybe we can be a better model at the local level for how, at the federal level, people should behave. And I don't know if that's a question or not, but I really appreciated those earlier comments.
I agree with too many people are getting into it just because they're narcissists and not enough are public servants. We have to get back to the point where we realize that they work for us and we don't work for them. By the way, I'm not saying that everybody. I will say this: I have met personally, the politicians that I've met them, at all different levels on both parties. I'd say, with a few exceptions, very, 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 very few exceptions, I respect them all, for getting involved. Because anytime you put your ass on the line like that, you're going to get hit with slings and arrows, and it's not just you; it's your family. It's your family. I mean, I know what I get, so I can only imagine what Congressman Fortenberry or Congressman Lee Terry, who was here, what they got. I mean, I can only imagine because I know what I get. So anytime any of these people put their ass on the line, I respect that, with very few exceptions. Two come to mind: one Republican, one Democrat. Maybe three come to mind, but anyway. So we need more people like that, and I do think that. And maybe it's the old saying, don't hate the player, hate the game, because I think that a lot of these people get in there with the idea that they're there to be a public servant, and then the system takes over and it sort of disillusions them, and then they get out and go back home, and the narcissists, stay in well past their prime.
Okay. Tom,
Can I say a few things on that, Michael? Can I say a few things on that, Michael? Is that okay? Or
I'm sorry.
can I respond to that a little bit, the question? And
quickly, but we're running out of time.
Okay,
And
okay.
I would like everybody to use 1 minute to kind of sum up, including you, Victor, your reflections on our discussion.
Okay, just quickly. There's
Quickly.
a concept, I think it comes from the Catholic tradition, called subsidiary and solidarity. I referred to it earlier. So to the questioner's point, the attitude we need to start having to get away from the palace intrigue and the food fight, which is generated mostly based on national media, is involvement on a local level. And that's where local problems solved locally is a great model to create more civic engagement, civic knowledge. It's not about the magical leader in Washington solving your problems. And so that's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of public service, Aristotle talked about the high-minded man, but what he meant is, the reluctance, there should be a reluctance to serve in a way, like I'm not worthy to serve. That attitude is a better attitude, because then, and I think the people have to ask you to serve because they see you as a genuine leader in the community, getting things done. And the third thing, I recommend people see a documentary on HBO called The Swamp. And these issues, Matt Gaetz is in it, others are in it, and it talks about these issues of how the fundraising mechanism of politics is a culprit in this, and it needs to be looked at. But I'm not sure there's some easy solution to it. And the movie deals with that and the need for questions, not easy answers, but questions about it.
Victor?
Geez, I don't have too much to say. I think we covered a lot of ground. Of course, we could have talked about for another 30 or 40 minutes on this, but I thought this was very, very good, very, very insightful. And I'm sure that the idea of moderation will probably come back in future free speech things, even if that's not the subject, because I think, to me, moderation is the kind of thing that will bring in both sides, where everybody can say, hey, I like that idea. That's a good direction to go. Everything has another direction other than left or right, if you ask me.
Very good. And, Rick, would you like to give a little summary of your reflections of our discussion here? You're muted. Oh, there you go.
I am muted. No, I thought it went really good, and I was going to make the joke, not bad for a couple of prep graduates. So to give them a bad time.
Benson Bunny's being represented here too.
And the Benson Bunny. We do usually wrap up at 10. So for those people that want to leave, we won't think rude of you if you sign off, but we can continue after 10, because I kind of wanted to hear, just a summary of individual behavior, particularly from James and Victor, and from Tom. What are the behaviors that can lead to a less vitriolic political environment? But let's kind of wrap up and thank everybody. We'll be back on the third Saturday of the next month as usual. We'll have another interesting debate, and as soon as we get that in plan, we'll let you guys know. If you have some ideas, please contact myself or Mike or Joe, because like today, it was Victor's idea, and we're really pleased that Victor stepped up and took control of the issue. It was really, really nice and very thoughtful.
Yeah, I was going to say, for as far as discussing future issues, we're not satisfied with just talking about politics and opinions and controversial issues. I'm working on one on religion. Let's just get it on, you know. Let's go for the full Monty. Maybe over Thanksgiving or something, we'll talk about that.
Rick, to your question, I think an answer to that would be, we just need to talk more. We need to talk more and understand people that aren't like us. Let's take gay marriage used to be a real wedge issue,
Yeah.
a real political wedge issue. You know, this side versus that side, gay marriage. And then as more and more people got to know gay people, you know, their brother, their cousin, the guy at work, gal at work, whatever, you know, I mean, they got to know them. They said, well, maybe it's not such a bad thing. And things went on. Same thing with race issues. You know, most people, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, most people get along, okay? Because they meet people, they know people. They may not necessarily be best of friends, but they can work together. And that's, you know, getting to know people that are different than you. And you don't always, like I said, we're a stew and not a melting pot. And looking at it from that way and think of ourselves more as Americans than as Republicans or Democrats, I think we can go far on that. But it's going to take somebody to be a leader to get people to start following that idea.
You want my final minute, Mike, or?
Yeah, you go for that, and then we are into a general discussion too of people that are hanging in.
I got to leave about 10 minutes, but
yeah,
okay.
Go ahead, James.
Yeah, I'm just going to end, not to seem pretentious, but I think these are relevant lines. I'm going to end with two short segments from two poems. The first is from The Second Coming by William Butler Yeats, and it reads, "Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falcon. Yeah. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of intensity." And that's from the beginning of Yeats's poem. And then at the end is, for me, and he did write poems in response to Yeats, but W.H. Auden, he ends this poem called September 1st, 1939, obviously around, you know, the height, really the beginning of the World War II. He says, I forget the exact moment he was talking about. It might have been the invasion of Poland, but his last line of that poem is, "Defenseless under the night, our world in stupor lies, yet dotted everywhere, ironic points of light flash out wherever the just exchange their messages. May I, composed like them, of Eros and of dust, beleaguered by the same negation and despair, show an affirming flame."
Well, I just throw out that you talk about tipping point issues like gay marriage. It looks like medical marijuana and recreational marijuana are up on the stage for tipping points. We'll see. I think it's a problem when you can't have when you can go over to Colorado. A friend of mine, his wife had bone cancer, and he went over to Colorado to get marijuana for her to help her with the chemo and the pain. But as soon as he crossed that border in Nebraska, he's violating the law, isn't he? And so continuity in federal law sometimes it can take precedence after a certain turning point, you know, what we would call. And I have a child that was born with seizure, a grandchild born with seizures, and that advocacy for the non-THC component of medical marijuana is important to us as a family. Real important.
Maybe the whole country would be better off if we stayed stoned.
Yeah. Well, you know what they did in California is kind of a model too. Is once they legalized recreational marijuana, they went into their prison system and said, "Who's in here for minor possession of marijuana for recreational use?" And I believe they commuted those sentences. I mean, I think at this point in life, in our life and our understanding, it's kind of bad if we have somebody in prison for recreational use of marijuana. I'm not talking about somebody who deals marijuana and cocaine. I'm talking about somebody who just, gets caught in a bad situation with it.
Yeah.
But that's another issue. All I'm talking about is tipping point. That's what happened with gay marriage. People say they've never seen an issue change that quickly in our country. And it was tipping point is what caused it. And I believe the rule, James, that you live in that area, was a Maryland couple moving to Virginia. That was the case. That was the test case. That was the tipping point.
Yeah.
Legally.
But I think the point is that, and we've been circling around this, is the subsidiary and solidarity that we're talking about is the key thing, because I look at the 50 states as the farm league, or the petri dish of the democracy, of the experiment. And so states can try these things. Lots of states early on, actually our neighbor in Iowa, I think, was way ahead of us in terms of legalizing gay marriage. And the same with medical marijuana. There's a lot of states who've tried this way ahead of the curve. And I think that's the good thing about the democracy, is that I think we need to try out these ideas in the 50 states. Some things may not work, some things may be bad, but once they've been tried out, and some of the issues, there's always going to be complications with each new idea. Don't wait for the federal government to take the lead. The states and the localities take the lead. They create the innovation, and then it bubbles up to the top. If there's anything that hopefully I've cemented or communicated in this call, is that let's think local, let's think innovation locally. Let's try to move away from the palace intrigue in Washington.
And that's what James, that's what I call tipping point.
Yeah.
Is when enough states figure that out for themselves.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I was going to just mention, we didn't get to talk about gun control in the main talk, but that's something, when Jim said that, I would like to see a state try, a couple of states try something with gun control, not a complete ban or anything, but just say, okay, this certain type, we just don't want this in the state now. And just see if that would change something for some people to say, hey, these guys are going to try it. Trying it at the federal level, you're going to get backlash instantly. And that's what's happened over and over and over again. Even with, it doesn't make any difference how many school shootings there are, over and over it happens. And, we're like, okay, well, could a couple of states just say, here's what we're going to do?
Yeah, Colorado did, Victor. Colorado banned high capacity magazines. And if you recall, once that happened, there were 5 counties in Colorado that threatened to secede from the state and join Idaho. Of course, that never happened. That didn't get off the ground. But that was a move, a moderate, a kind of a moderate move. Who in the heck needs, double 30 round clips duct taped together, for their sporting weapon?
Right. I mean, one of the things that I've talked about that just makes me, it just makes me think a lot about it. Years ago, we had smoking everywhere, restaurants, bars, everywhere. Everybody smoked, anywhere they wanted to. And finally, the consensus happened, and it took till the early 2000s when everybody said, okay, you know what? I think we're going to just ban smoking inside anywhere, any restaurants, any places like that, because they said people want to breathe clean air. And I thought, well, that was a great argument, but it took a long time to get to that point as far as the smoking thing goes. And my thing, it's a completely different issue, but I'm the kind of person, not being a gun owner, that I look around and I say, well, I'd love to use that argument that I would like to ban at least certain types of guns because I want to feel safer, and I don't. With the 300 million guns that we have in the country, I'm like, we don't really need that many guns,
Right.
So that's just me.
One thing, though, when we talk about these issues, that's really important to remember is, you make a good point, Vic, about rights and responsibilities, and we're always, we're holding that in balance. Smoking bans are an example of that. And we always use the term in Washington, what's the accommodation that can be made? Is there an accommodation here? Mm-hmm. But one of the problems that folks make is that they are, and I'm guilty as anybody, but unable to see the own hypocrisy and contradictions in their argument. So for example, I'm a registered independent, and I think that's probably what most media people should be. No offense, Tom, but I think you should.
I am now.
Okay.
I am.
I think that's where you should be. And in terms of this issue, the Democrats I'm talking generally, obviously there's exceptions, but they tend to talk in the need for restrictions when it comes to things like guns. But then, and then the Republicans always say, yeah, but there's countries that have completely banned guns and they still have mass violence, or there's states that make it highly difficult to get a gun, or cities like Chicago, and and there's the back and forth. Oh, but they get the guns from Indiana, blah 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 blah. So the thing is, it's important to have this kind of moderate reaching that consensus. It's so important to look at one's own contradictions. So yes, as a Democrat, you'd say, yes, we should restrict the amount of guns. But then don't say we shouldn't have restrictions at the border, because in a way that's you're contradicting yourself, because Democrats will say, oh, but walls don't work. Oh, restrictions won't stop it. But at the same time, they're saying, yeah, but we should have some moderate restrictions here because they might work. So you have to think through the issue and think like, well, that's where the moderate will arise, from people that see that the issues are connected. And if you could find some consensus in terms of principles, and I think this is about rights and responsibilities, then we'll get somewhere. We'll get somewhere finally.
It seems to me first that that's a false equivalency. But with regard to guns, I've got no problem with hunters, hunters who provide food for their families. I have no trouble with people who seem to need a pistol for home protection. I do not understand why any American citizen needs an assault rifle. Assault rifles are designed for one purpose, and that is to kill people. Huge clips are designed to kill people. And it doesn't seem to me that's useful. Now, to say that if we have something like that, it won't solve all of our problems. Of course it won't. People will still be shot. But if there are fewer people being shot, it seems to me that that's a good thing. And I can tell you something, it's a lot harder to kill somebody with a dagger than with a gun.
Well, that was my point. If even some people, less people are killed, and if even we stop a little bit of illegal immigration,
that helps.
So that's what I'm saying. That's not a false equivalency. Like, these small little changes can make a difference.
Okay.
And so if we could come together and say, yeah, we can't have the grand solution, but a smaller solution, and that's how our office operates,
right?
Rather than the phone book size legislation to solve.
Right. One of the things about immigration, if there are no restrictions at all, that's troublesome. If you try to deport 11+ million people, that's idiotic. Our economy will come crashing down, and there are certain industries that will no longer exist. I think back to the time when my grandparents came from Russia, and there was no such thing as an illegal immigrant. There was only an immigrant who is kept out for cause. And believe it or not, when they asked the question, do you plan to overthrow the government of the United States by force or violence? Some of those folks said, yes, I do. and they were not let in.
Hey, here's too, James, on the issue of guns. A lot of us in Nebraska have credibility at that table. I'm a hunter, and I have a gun cabinet. I have guns in it. But I would say to anybody that I found, and I have shot the AR-15 and the Kalashnikov. They are horrible hunting weapons. They're just awful. I mean, for that I have a 30-06 with a scope. You know what I'm saying? And so there's credibility there. There is room to make some small moves, and I think hunters in Nebraska, if you could get together with a lot of them and say, well, what would be reasonable? You know, just we'll talk about it because we use their tools to us.
I agree with you. And I think that's exactly right. I mean, there is another aspect to the Second Amendment debate, which is perhaps a fringe position, but the argument is that the bulwark, the reason there's some people believe, and I think there's actually some credibility a little bit in this, is that the government to some extent does need to fear its people a little bit. And a well-armed citizenry creates that necessary fear. Now, I'm not a gun owner. My dad grew up on a farm, but he didn't like guns either. And so, but he had a lot of friends, and I have friends who have weapons and hunt and use them for protection, etc. But that's not my point. It's not about where you stand on the debate. The point is small solutions, what seemingly small solutions at a state and local level can get some buy-in. And that's where we find the center. I'll just give an example from our own office. We have a bill called Act for ALS, right? Got almost 300 co-sponsors, people from across the spectrum. ALS is a terrible disease. You probably know about it also as Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yeah.
It kills you within 2 to 5 years, almost no exceptions. And it's cruel. It's a terrible disease. Now, what we get pushback from Democrats because you're not dealing with all of healthcare. You're not solving all of healthcare. This is a small disease category. It's not a big enough thing for us to pass this bill. That's how a lot of people think in Washington. It's all or nothing, zero-sum game, big phone book sized piece of legislation that nobody reads. How about smaller solution? We try to solve things for this particular cohort of people. What do they need? They need the freedom. They need to make right to try real. That is, I'm dying in 2 years. There's this treatment. It doesn't pass all the FDA protocol. It's not going to get passed because it only helps 20% of the people. Why can't I use it? And so that's, I'm going to die by the time the study's done. It's showing results anecdotally. Let me have access to it. So we have a bill that enables that because it's compassionate. It solves it for a small group of people. But there's other debilitating diseases. So if it works in this case, then it can be applied to those other things. So you build it piece by piece. Same with gun control. What is a reasonable level of protection, right, for citizens?
Jim,
and start small.
This approach has been used in our own history. The Compromise of 1850 that included 8 different items. They couldn't pass it all at once. And so Henry Clay says, okay, what we'll do then is we'll pass this one thing at a time. And they got it all passed. Now, it wasn't all good stuff, but it got passed. People are always talking about changing people's minds. Before you change their minds, change their behaviors. And once behaviors become ingrained, their minds also change. That's what happened with the issue of gay marriage. Once you change behaviors, people's minds follow. That's what happened to a significant degree with civil rights legislation. So I think you're absolutely right when you say take this single problem that you're dealing with, this small item, and deal with it, and then see where that leads you.
Rick and Omaha, you're Rick, I see, and then Omaha. I'm not sure of the name. It just says Omaha. Did you guys have anything you wanted to ask or contribute?
Yeah, my name is Tony Stout. I'd like to jump in. So you guys don't have a heart attack, I want you to know, with full disclosure, that I am a Trump supporter. There's a lot of things that he did that I didn't like, but I'd like to say I agree with Tom's idea of rank voting. because it creates what I would consider a blended politician. And in my view, the closest guy right now that I can see blended is Joe Manchin over in West Virginia. He seems to be a guy that can carry weight on both shoulders. But long term, and I don't think it'll ever happen, I think that we need to get rid of career politicians, and I think that term limits could do that. Granted, we would lose some good politicians. We'd lose some really strong guys that know what they're doing. But I'd like to get back to what we had when we first got started, where you're supposed to come off the farm, help the government run for a little while, and then go back home. That's where I would go. And then the last thing, you guys were talking about smoking. I'm a non-smoker. My wife's a non-smoker. She's a nurse, vehemently non-smokers. But I do believe that shouldn't be a law. I think that if a guy owns a restaurant and he wants to create like cigar rooms, we've got kind of a quasi way of doing that right now. But if a guy owns a restaurant or a guy owns a store and smokers are welcome, and you don't like smoke, then you just don't spend money with that guy. I think we try to legislate too much thinking. And that's my sense, guys.
I agree with you.
How about
Yeah, we do have term limits, by the way. It's called the vote.
Well, I grant that, but it doesn't work because the politician gets in office and then he gets the money going and you can't get him out.
That's
you can't get him out.
Rick, you said your name's Rick, right? You said your name's Rick?
I'm Tony.
Tony.
I didn't see your name on the screen, so I couldn't see it. But I would just say a quick couple things before I have to go. The problem with term limits, and again, this is up to on a national level, it's another issue, but on state and local level, I mean, I think this is another part of the great 50 state experiment, and you can have term limits. It's fine, obviously, on the state and local level for sure. So the question is, what I think is a danger in term limits is the lack of institutional knowledge.
Right.
And what happens is, if people are on 1 or 2 terms and they're out, they become even more dependent on lobbyists. We see this. They don't understand the system. The lobbyists then own them, who explain the system to them. And then it's a mafia-like relationship. It's a quid pro quo. You are now dependent on me for understanding bills, understanding how the game is played. And so that's a real danger. And so, again, we have to talk it out. I don't have an opinion either way on it, but it's a real danger. And I think you said you're a Trump supporter. I mean, one of the real terrible things that's happened in the last 4 to 8 years is you can't say that publicly.
I know. I know.
And that's not right.
I am not going to be marginalized. I'll tell you that.
And I applaud you for that courage, because you should be able to say that.
Absolutely.
And not be canceled for that.
There's an example of that in the McCarthy days.
Correct.
To say that you were an anti-communist, which is a perfectly reasonable position to take, labeled you as a pro-Joe McCarthy kind of fella.
That's right.
That nobody wanted that. So labeling generally is a substitute for thinking.
Yeah. Hey,
Okay.
Terry, you had your hand up, Terry, and you have not been able to say anything or ask any questions yet today.
Let's see if I could.
Unmute, Terry.
Unmute. Terry, unmute yourself.
I'll get it. There we go.
Oh,
Go, Terry.
Am I unmuted yet?
yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good. Technology and me. I thoroughly enjoyed today, and I just think this has been a marvelous. I thought Jim Crowley was wonderful. I have solutions for most of the problems, but I keep them mostly to myself because nobody else thinks I'm very smart. I've always said that I had the solution to getting along. I remember being 6, 7, 8 years old and have a dozen guys going down to the Elmwood Park and playing a little baseball. Somebody had a bat, somebody had a ball. The people that had gloves got to use them in the field, and we shared all of that. We argued about what was fair, what was foul, and we made up our rules. We got along, and we had the main objective of having good athletic exercise and fun with each other. And we did it with a high degree of regularity. In fall, it was football. We played a lot of driveway basketball. It had the same discussions, arguments, got along and made up the rules. And life was wonderful. My kids, my grandkids, my great grandkids don't have that luxury. They have little leagues, they have umpires, they have uniforms, they have parents who think their darlings are the best. Unfortunately, I think that's a big loss for them. I've often said that on the abortion issue, if I was emperor of the world, or God, I guess I'd have to be God, I would call all 10-year-olds or 12-year-olds or whatever before me and say, bless you children, you're sterile. Come back when you have a responsible partner and want to have children, I'll unsterilize you.
Kind of like muting and unmuting here, Terry. Okay.
I unmuted myself. How did I manage?
Hold on. And then, listen, that's good. I like that. I like that comparison. Victor, you did a heck of a job getting James. Wonderful, wonderful. And so Tom is gone. Rick, you didn't have any input yet. Is there something you would like to say or ask? Certainly to James for one. Yeah.
No, Rick said something. He commented a while back.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I made a comment earlier about bringing more topics, parallel items in a topic and bringing it toward the middle. I kind of mentioned that. One thing I might mention too regarding the moderates, where's a home for the moderates? Where do they go?
Okay.
There are third-party options, and you had the carnage of, not to offend any Trumpers, but you had the carnage of Trump. If by chance we have a failure of Biden, I think you will see a rise toward the libertarians or the Greens. People have to find a home. They like to be around like-minded people. They don't have the money to be electable, but I think you're going to be seeing probably a large surge in the next 2 elections.
I don't know.
Coke and Pepsi is not working.
Yeah.
As a lifelong Democrat, I have always believed that the Democratic Party was at its best when the Republican Party was at its best.
Yes.
2 strong parties. Our experience historically with third parties has not been, shall I say, enjoyable. The largest third party candidate I can think of right offhand, the 2 that come to mind are George Wallace and Ross Perot.
Right.
And those
personality candidates, yes.
Right. And those are rivers that I would choose not to navigate.
Oh, I totally agree. I guess and third parties have contributed to positions that the major parties have adopted later. We all know that. But that's for another, we could talk about that for hours.
Right. But in terms of workability,
yeah,
under our current system, I don't know if that's promising. It's worth an effort. It's worth an experiment.
Yeah, right.
I would throw out just 2 words that I think summed up the whole thing to me. I like it simple. Desire, and then an arrow going to the right saying method. That seems to be the critical thing. There's a lot of desire. It's hard to figure out method. And I also want to point out there's a heck of a lot going on in the world, James, other than politics. For example, I was very involved in the vehicle world for 20 years and sat on the Safety Council for the United States and Canada and worked with the major manufacturers on safety issues, for example. But let me just tell you guys that you can have all the politics you want about a CAFE standard for vehicles, whether or not they should be electrical or not. The vehicle world is moving on its own. It really, really does not give a damn about politics. It gives a damn about selling vehicles. And so the truth of the matter is China will, in a date certain, we don't know exact date yet, but we figure it's within the next 2 years, ban the introduction of new vehicles with internal combustion engines in them. So they are the largest buyer of vehicles in the world, followed by California, which is also going to do that, and the state of Connecticut. So what the manufacturers look at is, how do I exist? How do I survive? I have to sell product. So it really, the political environment, you know, after a while we threw up our hands and we said, we don't care. This is what's going to happen. And so there are economic forces out there alive in the world. They're alive and well. The vaccine is a good example. What Pfizer and Moderna did in selling to the world. They didn't need a mandate from the US government to do that. They had a product and they wanted a market. That's my 2 cents worth on that. Do not ignore that's what operates in the world too, is, you know, capital, product, and market. Yeah. And by the way, the secret to the success in the United States of America, melting pot or not, were 2 items for me. One was abundant, cheap energy. And 2 was, we knew how to get goods to market. We better than anybody else in the world. We had inexpensive energy, abundant energy, and goods to market.
We got a lot of food too. We got a lot.
Well, you know, also 60% of the cost of our American rail system was paid by the consumer, by government. If you look at the state of Nebraska, Jim, 1/7 of the land area of the state of Nebraska was given to the railroads for free.
Yeah. I live next to it. It drives me
nuts. And it turned out to be a hell of a good bargain.
No shit. Yeah, for the entire nation.
I think you make a good point. There is a role for the federal government in terms of national infrastructure. In fact, we're having this debate, and maybe it could be a future discussion right now, because again, Fortenberry is the ranking member overseeing rural broadband. And in a state like ours, Nebraska, where 99% of people in, say, Omaha and urban areas have access to high speed if they choose, or through they can get a subsidy for it, et cetera. But people have access to high speed internet, which is, you know, for Zoom calls like this and for teleeducation, telework is essential. But if you live in, remote parts of the Sandhills, et cetera, it's like 60%, 65%. And that's important for the farmer because it helps. If you have good connectivity, it helps with precision agriculture, which has implications for global warming. It helps with your spouse or your children being able to access the full resources of the internet for their own education, especially during a moment like this. And it actually can help build community. So so this is a debate we're having because there's all these companies who theoretically could provide the connectivity to remote parts of America, not just Nebraska, but there's no profit in it. So they don't do it. And so what role then does the federal government have? And I just had an interesting discussion with NET about this because they're not technically broadband, but they're advancing a kind of new robust form of antenna that is like something you plug into, it's not like the old rabbit ears, but that through TV waves and through the television airwaves, you can actually provide a kind of internet access to remote areas that is better even than satellites. So there's a lot of different players in this space, but how are we going to get it done when there's no profit in it? And so these are the questions we have to debate. Like, there are times when the government needs to come in and lay the infrastructure.
Exactly. In those instances where the success of whatever the endeavor is cannot be measured in dollars and cents, that seems to be the place where government has a role to play. And that's a perfect example of it.
Well, goods to service, goods to market. The government has a big role to play in that. And
Yep.
so I'm excited that we may look at an infrastructure bill. We'll see what happens. Jim, the art of compromise is critical to that bill. There's no other way to get it done. And so, yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
Thanks, everybody. Are there other questions, or I probably have to move on? But
I gotta go too. My wife's gotta go walking.
You notice, by the way, folks, do you notice I got a kiss on camera?
Did you really? Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks,
a
Mike.
lot of fun, you guys.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
week.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Cheers.
Nice meeting you, Tony.
Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks again.
Terry, I know you. And I know you, Rick. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Vic. Bye-bye.
You got it.